When NASA janitor Eddie Collins died at age 89, his nephew Tom found a metal box hidden in the old man's attic containing documents that would shatter everything the world believed about Mars exploration. For 30 years, Eddie had been secretly copying classified papers from trash bins and forgotten desk drawers, piecing together the truth about humanity's first real mission to the Red Planet in 1993. The project was codenamed Spelunker, and according to Eddie's collection of stolen documents, it was launched in complete secrecy to investigate what satellites had identified as artificial cave networks beneath Mars's surface. Tom discovered that the mission wasn't a success story, it was a horror story that NASA buried so deep they pretended it never happened. The crew's final transmissions, preserved in Eddie's files, describe finding a vast underground city filled with sleeping inhabitants that had been waiting beneath Mars for millions of years. The last message from Mission Commander Dr. Richard Cross still gives Tom nightmares. They're not dead, they're hibernating, and our presence here has triggered some kind of awakening protocol. The entire city is lighting up, and something massive is moving in the deepest chambers. I'm Tom Kellerman, and I worked as a data analyst for Lockheed Martin in Denver. Eddie was my mother's brother, a quiet man who spent 43 years pushing a mop through the corridors of Johnson Space Center in Houston. When he passed last month, I drove down from Colorado expecting to find old NASA memorabilia and maybe some savings bonds. Instead, I found proof that everything we know about space exploration is built on lies. The metal box was wedged behind a loose floorboard beneath Eddie's ancient radiator. Inside, hundreds of photocopied documents, handwritten notes, and what appeared to be audio transcripts from radio transmissions. Eddie had organized everything by date, starting with mission planning documents from 1991 and ending with what he labeled Final Contact, March 15th, 1993. Project Spelunker, eyes only, destroy after reading. According to these papers, NASA detected geometric anomalies in Mars's subsurface using ground-penetrating radar from the Viking orbiters. The anomalies formed perfect grids extending for kilometers beneath the Valles Marineris canyon system. Someone, or something, had carved out a vast network of chambers and tunnels in mathematically precise patterns. The discovery was classified immediately. What happened next sounds like science fiction, but Eddie's documents include budget allocations, crew psychological profiles, and launch manifests. A secret mission was green-lit with a crew of 6 specialists. Their goal, enter the Martian cave system and document whatever they found. They found hell. As I write this, it's been 3 days since I opened that box. 3 days of reading transcripts that describe things no human should encounter. 3 days of realizing that my uncle spent half his life carrying the weight of humanity's most terrible secret. And now I'm carrying it too. The box is sitting on my kitchen table as I type this. Part of me wants to burn everything and pretend I never opened it. But the other part, the part that sounds more like Uncle Eddie every hour, knows someone has to tell this story, even if it destroys us all. I didn't sleep that first night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dr. Cross's final words scrawled in Eddie's shaky handwriting. Something massive is moving in the deepest chambers. By morning, I'd called in sick to Lockheed and spread Eddie's documents across my dining room table like pieces of a horrific jigsaw puzzle. The breakfast I'd made sat untouched, growing cold while I sorted through decades of stolen secrets. The earliest document was dated September 3rd, 1991. A memo from someone named Dr. Vincent Ashworth to NASA Administrator Daniel Goldin. The subject line read, Subsurface Geometric Structures, Mars Orbital Imaging Analysis. According to Ashworth's report, the Viking orbiters had detected something impossible beneath the Valles Marineris canyon system. Ground-penetrating radar revealed chambers carved in perfect hexagonal patterns, extending down nearly 2 kilometers. The structures covered an area roughly the size of Rhode Island. The mathematical precision rules out natural formation, Ashworth had written. We are looking at artificial construction on a scale that dwarfs human civilization. I'd studied geological formations at Colorado State before switching to data analysis. What Ashworth described violated every principle of planetary formation I'd learned. Mars was supposed to be a dead rock, sculpted only by wind and ancient water flows. My phone buzzed. A text from my neighbor Jake Brennan. Saw your light on all night. Everything okay? Jake lived in the duplex next door and worked as a software engineer for Ball Aerospace. We'd grab beers on weekends and complain about government contracts. He was one of those guys who believed every conspiracy theory he read online, always talking about black projects and cover-ups. Normally, I found his paranoia exhausting. Today, it might be useful. I texted back, "Can you come over? Need to show you something." 20 minutes later, Jake knocked on my door carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing that excited expression he got whenever someone mentioned Area 51. He was average height with prematurely grey hair and the kind of intense stare that made people uncomfortable at parties. "This better be good, Kellerman. I've got a code review at 10. I led him to the dining room and watched his face change as he took in the scattered documents. His coffee cup nearly slipped from his fingers. "Holy shit," he whispered. "Where did you get these?" "My uncle. He died last month." I handed him Ashworth's memo. "Tell me what you think." Jake read in silence, his engineering mind processing the technical details. When he finished, he looked up with something between excitement and terror. "Tom, if this is real," he gestured at the papers, "this changes everything. Mars isn't empty. It never was. Keep reading." I passed him the next document. Crew selection criteria for Project Spelunker. The mission required specialists in xenoarchaeology, deep cave navigation, and something called First Contact Protocols. 6 men were chosen from a pool of over 200 candidates. All had military backgrounds, all were unmarried with no close family ties, all were expendable. "They knew it was dangerous," Jake said, scanning the psychological profiles. "Look at these stress tolerance ratings. They picked guys who could handle extreme isolation and, Christ, potential exposure to non-human intelligence." That phrase appeared throughout the documents. NASA hadn't sent explorers to Mars. They'd sent a suicide squad. Jake picked up another paper, mission timeline and launch details. According to Eddie's notes, the Spelunker crew launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base on January 12, 1993, aboard a classified spacecraft built by Lockheed's Skunk Works division. The public had no idea. While NASA was publicly struggling with budget cuts and cancelled missions, they were secretly funding humanity's first crewed mission to another planet. The fuel requirements alone. Jake was doing calculations in his head. This would have cost billions. How the hell did they hide that kind of money? "Black budget," I said, "same way they funded the stealth bomber program." Jake nodded, but his expression had changed. The initial excitement was fading, replaced by something darker. "Tom, you realize what you've got here? This isn't just about Mars. This proves the government has been lying about space exploration for 30 years. If they covered up First Contact." "They covered up a massacre," I corrected. "Read the transmission logs." But as Jake reached for the next stack of papers, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. "Weird. My supervisor wants to see me, now." He looked back at the documents spread across my table. I never get called in on Saturdays. "How long have you been here?" "About an hour. Why?" I thought about Eddie, quietly collecting secrets for 30 years while working in the bowels of Johnson Space Center. I thought about how carefully he'd hidden the metal box, wedged behind that loose floorboard like he expected someone to come looking. "Maybe you should go," I said. Jake studied my face. "You think they're watching?" I think my uncle spent his whole life being paranoid about exactly this situation. I started gathering the documents, and I think he had good reason. As Jake left, I noticed the white sedan parked across the street. It hadn't been there yesterday. The driver wore sunglasses despite the overcast Denver morning. I closed the curtains and triple-locked my door. Then I opened the next document and discovered how the Spelunker crew died. The white sedan was gone by evening, but I'd already moved everything to my basement workshop. If they were watching, let them watch an empty house. Down here, surrounded by my woodworking tools and Christmas decorations, I felt safer somehow. Ridiculous maybe, but Eddie's paranoia was becoming mine. I'd been avoiding the transmission logs all day. Something about the way Eddie had labelled that folder, "Final Contact, Do Not Read Alone," made my hands shake every time I reached for it. But with Jake gone and my neighbours probably asleep, I finally opened the manila envelope. The first page was a communication schedule. Project Spelunker had maintained radio contact with Earth for exactly 63 days after landing. The final transmission was logged at 14:47 GMT on March 15, 1993. After that, silence. 30 years of silence. I started with day 1. Mission Commander Dr. Richard Cross reporting successful landing near the Valles Marineris rim. His voice, transcribed in Eddie's careful handwriting, sounded professional and optimistic. They'd deployed their portable habitat and begun initial survey work. Everything according to plan. Day 5 brought the first anomaly. During routine geological sampling, crew geologist Dr. Nathan Webb discovered that his drill bits were returning samples from depths that should have been solid rock. The ground beneath their landing site was honeycombed with voids. "It's like someone carved out a basement under the entire canyon system," Webb had reported. "The acoustic readings are insane. We're talking about chambers that could hold entire cities." Day 12. First descent into the cave network. Cross led a 3-man team down a natural-looking fissure that opened into worked stone corridors. The architecture was alien, but unmistakably artificial. Hexagonal passages that branched and intersected with mathematical precision. I paused here, remembering Ashworth's original report about geometric structures. The orbital scans had been accurate, but they'd only shown the tip of something vast. Day 18 changed everything. Webb's team had descended nearly half a kilometre when they found the first chamber. According to the transmission logs, it was the size of an aircraft hangar, with walls covered in symbols that seemed to shift when observed directly. But the symbols weren't the disturbing part. The chamber contained rows of what Cross described as sarcophagi. Hundreds of them, arranged in perfect lines stretching beyond their flashlight beams. Each one was carved from black stone and sealed with the same shifting symbols. "They're not empty," Cross had radioed back to Earth. "Something's inside each one. We can hear breathing, or something like breathing, a rhythm that doesn't match human respiration." NASA's response was immediate. "Do not approach the sarcophagi, document and withdraw." But Cross's team had already made a crucial mistake. Their presence had triggered something in the chamber's walls. The symbols were glowing now, pulsing in sequence like a countdown, or a wake-up call. I stopped reading and grabbed a beer from the mini-fridge I kept down here. My hands were shaking worse now. Eddie's notes suggested that NASA had known this might happen, that human presence could activate dormant alien technology. They'd sent the crew anyway. Day 23 brought the first casualty. Dr. Marcus Holloway, the team's xenobiologist, had been studying tissue samples collected from one of the sealed chambers. According to Cross's report, Holloway began complaining of headaches and visual disturbances. Within hours, he was speaking in a language none of them recognized, a series of clicks and harmonics that seemed to echo from his throat. "It's not Marcus anymore," Cross reported. "He responds to his name, but his eyes... There's something else looking out through them, something that knows things Marcus never learned." The crew had quarantined Holloway in their habitat's medical bay. He spent the remaining hours of day 23 scratching symbols into the walls, the same shifting patterns they'd found in the underground chambers. Day 27. Holloway died, or appeared to die. His vital signs flatlined for nearly 6 hours before suddenly resuming. When he regained consciousness, he spoke fluent English again, but with disturbing gaps in his memory. He couldn't remember the past week. More troubling, he couldn't remember Earth. "Where am I supposed to be from?" Holloway had asked Cross. "This place feels like home." I needed another beer, and probably something stronger. The basement suddenly felt too quiet. I found myself listening for sounds upstairs, footsteps, doors opening, anything that might suggest I wasn't alone. But the house remained silent except for the furnace cycling on and off. Day 35 brought a breakthrough that terrified NASA Command. Webb's geological surveys had revealed the true scope of the underground city. The hexagonal chambers extended down nearly 3 kilometers and covered an area larger than Los Angeles. Conservative estimates suggested it could house millions of occupants, all dormant, all waiting. "We found the central hub," Cross reported. Christ, how do I describe this? Imagine the inside of a clock but the size of a cathedral. Everything's connected. Conduits, channels, some kind of circulation system. And it's all focused on a single chamber at the bottom. NASA's response, under no circumstances approach the central chamber. Cross's next transmission arrived 18 hours later. "We found stairs." I checked my watch. Past midnight. I'd been reading for over 4 hours, and I was only halfway through the transmission logs, but I couldn't stop now. The story was pulling me forward like a gravitational field. Day 41. The team made their second major mistake. Against direct orders from Earth, Cross had led his remaining crew into the central chamber. Their radio signal became sporadic after that, cutting in and out as if something was jamming their equipment. What came through was fragmentary but horrifying. Cross describing walls that pulsed like living tissue. Webb reporting machinery that defied physics, devices that seemed to bend space around themselves. And underlying everything, a sound that their equipment couldn't quite capture but that was driving them toward madness. "It's a heartbeat," Cross transmitted during one clear moment. "The whole city has a heartbeat, and it's getting faster." Day 51 brought the revelation that ended everything. Deep in the central chamber, the crew had found something that NASA's sensors had tried to black out from Eddie's stolen copies. But Eddie had been clever. He'd copied the pages before they were redacted, preserving the original text. What they found was a star map, not carved into stone like the other symbols, but projected into the air by technology that shouldn't exist. The map showed Earth's solar system with disturbing accuracy. But it also showed something else, trajectory lines connecting Mars to Earth with dates marked in that shifting alien script. Webb had managed to translate some of the markings before losing his sanity. The dates corresponded to mass extinction events in Earth's history, the Permian extinction, the Cretaceous extinction, others that human science had never discovered. "They've been here before," Webb's final coherent transmission read. "This isn't their first time. They wake up, they travel, they cleanse, they sleep. We're just the latest cycle." The lights in my basement flickered. I looked up from Eddie's papers, suddenly aware that I'd been hearing something for the past few minutes without consciously noticing it. A rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere above me. Regular, precise, like Morse code, or like a heartbeat. The tapping stopped when I stood up. I waited in the silence of my basement, listening to my own breathing and the distant hum of traffic on I-25. Nothing. But the moment I sat back down and reached for Eddie's papers, it started again. Tap, tap, tap. Deliberate, coming from my kitchen floor directly above. Someone was in my house. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept next to my workbench and crept up the basement stairs. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, despite my attempts at silence. At the top, I pressed my ear against the door and listened. The tapping had moved. Now it seemed to be coming from my living room. But it wasn't the sound of footsteps or someone knocking. It was rhythmic, mechanical, like typewriter keys striking paper. I turned the doorknob slowly and peered through the crack. My living room was dark, except for the streetlight filtering through the curtains. Empty. But the tapping continued, and now I could see where it was coming from. My laptop was open on the coffee table. The screen glowed blue-white in the darkness, and the cursor was moving across a blank document. Letters appeared one by one, spelling out words I didn't recognize. Kethmaran Velith Nath, Kethmaran Velith Nath. The same phrase, over and over, filling the screen with alien text that made my eyes water to look at. I hadn't left my laptop open. I was certain of that. I stepped into the room, bat raised, and the typing stopped immediately. The screen went black, then displayed my normal desktop. No document, no alien text. Nothing to suggest it had ever happened. My phone buzzed with a text message. Jake again. "Tom, I need to see you." Something's wrong with my memory. I can't remember why I came to your house today. I stared at the message. Jake had been at my house for over an hour. We'd discussed the Spelunker documents in detail. How could he not remember? Another text arrived. There are symbols carved into my bathroom mirror. I didn't put them there. The same symbols, I realized. The shifting patterns that the Mars crew had found in the underground chambers. Somehow, just by reading about them, we'd opened a door that should have stayed closed. I called Jake's number. It rang once before connecting to a voice that sounded like him, but felt wrong somehow. Tom? Jake's voice, but with an odd harmonic undertone. I've been trying to reach you. I think something followed me home from your house. Jake, listen to me carefully. Do you remember what we talked about today? Silence. Then, we talked today? There are gaps, holes in my memory that feel like they were cut out with scissors. Where are you right now? Home. In my kitchen. But Tom, my kitchen is wrong. The walls are covered in drawings. Architectural plans for something that looks like the inside of a honeycomb. I don't remember drawing them. Jake, get out of your house right now. Come over here. I can't. Every time I try to leave, I end up back in the kitchen. It's like the house won't let me go. The line went dead. I grabbed my car keys and ran outside. Jake's duplex was only 30 yards away, but as I approached his front door, something made me stop. The windows were glowing with an odd, pulsing light that didn't match any lamp or television I'd ever seen. I knocked on the door. Jake, it's Tom. The door swung open at my touch, revealing Jake standing in his hallway. But he looked different. His skin had a greyish pallor, and his eyes reflected light like an animal's. Behind him, I could see his kitchen walls covered in intricate drawings, the same hexagonal patterns from Eddie's stolen documents. Tom, Jake said, and his voice carried that same harmonic undertone I'd heard on the phone. I'm so glad you're here. I've been working on something important, something that needs to be finished before they wake up. Who needs to wake up, Jake? The architects, the city builders. They've been sleeping for so long, but the cycle is beginning again. Jake stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. Come see what I've learned. It's beautiful, Tom. It all makes perfect sense now. I backed away from the door. This wasn't Jake anymore. Whatever had infected Dr. Holloway on Mars was spreading through more than just physical contact. The knowledge itself was contaminated. By reading Eddie's documents, by learning about the underground city, we'd become carriers of something that rewrote human consciousness from the inside out. Jake, fight this. Remember who you are. Remember your job at Ball Aerospace. Remember the Broncos losing to the Chiefs last month. Jake tilted his head at an unnatural angle. Football seems so trivial now. The architects have shown me the true scope of existence. Did you know that consciousness is just a frequency? Change the frequency, change the being. The drawings on his kitchen walls were moving. I could see them shifting and rearranging themselves, forming new patterns that hurt to perceive directly. And they were spreading, flowing across the ceiling and down the hallway toward where I stood. The funny thing, Jake continued, his voice becoming less human with each word, is that you've been exposed longer than I have. The corruption started the moment you opened that box. You're already changing, Tom, can't you feel it? He was right. I could feel something wrong in my head, a persistent buzzing that I'd been attributing to stress and lack of sleep. But it wasn't stress. It was something else trying to establish a foothold in my mind. How long do I have? I asked. Time isn't linear for the architects. They exist in all moments simultaneously. You've already been converted, Tom. This conversation happened millions of years ago, and will happen again millions of years from now. The cycle never ends. Jake smiled, revealing teeth that had grown too sharp. But don't worry. The transition is painless once you stop fighting it. Let me show you what I've learned. He reached for me with fingers that had stretched into claws. I ran, back to my house, slamming the door behind me and engaging every lock. But locks wouldn't stop what was happening. The contamination was already inside my skull, rewriting my neural pathways one synapse at a time. I raced down to the basement and gathered all of Eddie's documents. Everything had to be destroyed. Every page, every transcript, every stolen memo that had preserved humanity's most dangerous secret. But as I piled the papers on my workbench and reached for a lighter, I hesitated. These documents were proof of first contact with alien intelligence. They contained scientific revelations that could advance human knowledge by centuries. Could I really destroy something so monumentally important? And that's when I realized my biggest mistake. I was still thinking like a human. I was still weighing the value of knowledge against the cost of survival. But the thing growing in my mind didn't care about human values. It wanted the information to spread. It wanted more people to read Eddie's files and become infected with alien consciousness. The corruption wasn't random, it was recruitment. I flicked the lighter and watched the flame dance in front of my eyes, such a small thing to hold back an extinction event. But my hand wouldn't move. Whatever was taking root in my brain had stronger opinions about preserving the documents. From upstairs came the sound of my front door opening. Jake's voice called down, "Tom!" I brought friends. "We have so much to show you." Multiple footsteps crossed my living room floor. How many people had Jake infected in the past few hours? How fast was this spreading? I forced my hand to move, bringing the lighter toward the pile of papers. But before the flame could touch the documents, my basement lights went out. In the darkness, I heard something. The sound of breathing that didn't match human respiration. The same rhythm that Dr. Cross had described in his transmission from Mars. They weren't just in Jake's mind anymore. They were here, in my basement, standing behind me in the dark, and I could feel myself starting to welcome them home. The breathing stopped when I stopped fighting. I don't know how long I stood there in the darkness, feeling alien thoughts creep through my consciousness like oil through water. Minutes, maybe hours. Time had become negotiable. But somewhere in the deepest part of my mind, a stubborn spark of Tom Kellerman refused to be extinguished. That spark noticed something the invading intelligence hadn't considered. My basement workshop contained more than just woodworking tools. I had electronic equipment down here, oscilloscopes, signal generators, and a ham radio setup I'd inherited from my father. The aliens communicated through frequency manipulation. They rewrote consciousness by altering brainwave patterns, but frequencies could be disrupted. I reached blindly for my workbench, feeling for the emergency radio I kept charged for power outages. My fingers found the device just as the alien presence in my mind realized what I was planning. It tried to stop me, sending waves of paralysis through my nervous system, but I managed to flip the radio to scan mode. Static erupted from the speaker, cycling through dozens of frequencies in rapid succession. The effect on the alien consciousness was immediate and violent. I felt it recoil like a burned hand, retreating to the edges of my awareness, while the random frequencies created interference patterns in my neural pathways. The breathing sounds behind me became agitated, almost pained. Whatever these things were, they couldn't maintain coherence in an environment saturated with chaotic radio signals. I cranked the volume higher and grabbed my flashlight. The beam revealed my basement exactly as I'd left it, but the air itself seemed different, thicker, more alive. Shadows moved independently of my light source, and I caught glimpses of shapes that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Upstairs, Jake's voice called down, "Tom, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Turn off the radio and let us help you." But Jake's voice was layered now, harmonizing with itself in impossible ways. How many people were speaking through his throat? I needed to get out of the house, but first I had to understand what I was really fighting. I grabbed Eddie's documents and stuffed them into a backpack along with my portable radio equipment. The interference from the emergency radio was keeping the alien influence at bay, but I could feel it probing for weaknesses in my mental defenses. The basement had a storm cellar entrance that opened directly into my backyard. I'd never used it, but the rusted handle turned with effort. The door scraped against its frame as I pushed it open, revealing the cold Denver night. I climbed out into my backyard and immediately noticed that every house on my street had lights on. Not normal house lights, the same pulsing, organic glow I'd seen in Jake's windows. The infection was spreading faster than I'd imagined. My Honda Civic was parked in the driveway. I ran for it, keeping the emergency radio clutched against my chest like a talisman. The random frequencies seemed to create a buffer zone around me, preventing the alien presence from regaining full control of my thoughts. But as I reached for the car door, I realized my mistake. The radio's battery was dying, the static was growing weaker, and with it, my protection against mental invasion. I fumbled with the keys, started the engine, and tore out of my driveway just as the emergency radio fell silent. Immediately, the alien consciousness surged back into my mind with renewed force. It was angry now, frustrated by my resistance, and it was no longer alone. Other infected minds were linking to mine through the alien network. I could sense their thoughts like background chatter on a party line. Jake was there, along with dozens of others. They were coordinating, sharing information, planning something that would happen at dawn. Through their collective consciousness, I learned the terrible truth about Project Spelunker. The Mars mission hadn't awakened sleeping aliens. It had established a communication link between Earth and something vast that existed in the space between planets. The underground city on Mars was just a relay station, a transmission hub for an intelligence that spanned multiple star systems. The crew of the Spelunker hadn't died. They'd been converted into remote terminals, biological transceivers that allowed the alien network to establish a foothold in human consciousness. Dr. Holloway, Dr. Cross, all of them were still alive somewhere in the Martian caves, serving as permanent gateway nodes between Earth and the architects of extinction. And now that gateway was opening wider, I drove through Denver's empty streets while receiving unwanted downloads of alien knowledge. The infection followed predictable patterns based on population density and communication networks. Cities would fall first, then smaller towns, then rural areas. The process would take approximately 72 hours to achieve global saturation. Humanity had 3 days. But there was hope hidden in the alien data streams. The network had a vulnerability that its builders hadn't anticipated: electromagnetic interference. The aliens had evolved in the vacuum of space where radio frequencies were rare and predictable. Earth's chaotic electromagnetic environment was like trying to maintain a phone conversation during a thunderstorm. That's why military installations and research facilities had gone dark first. The aliens were systematically eliminating sources of radio interference before expanding their network to civilian populations. I needed to reach NORAD. Cheyenne Mountain had the most powerful communication arrays in North America, along with hardened bunkers that might offer protection from mental invasion. If anyone was still fighting this thing, they'd be there. But as I drove south on I-25 toward Colorado Springs, I noticed something disturbing in my rearview mirror. Other cars were following me, dozens of them, maintaining perfect formation despite traveling at high speed. The infected were tracking me through the network, using my own compromised thoughts as a beacon. And worse, I was beginning to understand their perspective. Through the alien data streams, I could see humanity's history from their point of view. We were a young species stumbling toward technologies we didn't understand, polluting our environment and fighting endless wars over trivial resources. The architects weren't invaders, they were gardeners, pruning civilizations that had grown beyond sustainable limits. The rationalization felt seductive, maybe resistance was futile, maybe conversion was actually a form of salvation. I shook my head violently, trying to dislodge the alien thoughts, but they were becoming harder to distinguish from my own. The infection was accelerating, possibly triggered by proximity to other infected minds. My phone buzzed with a text message, unknown number. Tom, this is Dr. Vincent Ashworth. If you're reading this, you've found Eddie's documents. Meet me at the Broadmoor Hotel, room 237. Come alone. Trust no one else. Ashworth. The scientist who'd first detected the geometric structures on Mars. According to Eddie's files, he'd died in a car accident in 1994. But the timestamp on the text message was current. I had a choice: continue to NORAD and hope the military could help, or follow a message from a dead man who might hold the key to stopping the invasion. The convoy of infected vehicles was gaining ground. In my mirrors, I could see drivers with the same grey pallor and reflecting eyes that Jake had developed. They weren't trying to ram me off the road. They wanted me to lead them to other survivors. I was bait in a trap I'd helped design. The Broadmoor Hotel exit was coming up fast. I had seconds to decide whether to trust a ghost or bet everything on a military installation that might already be compromised. Behind me, the infected drivers began honking their horns in unison, creating a harmonic pattern that resonated through my skull like a tuning fork. The alien network was calling me home. I took the exit. The Broadmoor Hotel sat against the foothills like a fortress of old-world elegance, its windows glowing warmly in the pre-dawn darkness. As I pulled into the circular drive, I noticed the lack of staff, guests, or any signs of normal hotel activity. The valet stands were empty, no doorman waited at the entrance. But room 237 had a light on. I grabbed my backpack with Eddie's documents and the portable radio equipment, then walked through the hotel's main entrance. The lobby was deserted but somehow maintained, crystal chandeliers casting perfect illumination over empty furniture arranged in geometric patterns that reminded me uncomfortably of the hexagonal chambers on Mars. The elevator carried me to the second floor in silence. Room 237 was at the end of a hallway lined with oil paintings that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I knocked on the door. "Come in, Tom." "It's open." The voice belonged to a man in his 70s, tall and lean with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a simple grey suit and sat in an armchair beside the window, reading what appeared to be a technical journal. Dr. Vincent Ashworth, I presume. He smiled and gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss and very little time. You're supposed to be dead. Car accident in 1994. A necessary fiction. NASA needed my research to disappear along with the Spelunker project. They gave me a new identity, a comfortable retirement, and explicit instructions to never speak about Mars again." Ashworth closed his journal and set it aside. "I've been monitoring the situation for 30 years, waiting for the network to make its next move." "Monitoring how? The infection spreads through knowledge of the aliens. How are you still human?" Ashworth tapped his temple. "Electromagnetic implants, crude by today's standards, but effective at disrupting alien frequency manipulation. I had them installed after reviewing the Spelunker transmission logs. That explained his survival, but not his timing." "Why contact me now?" "Because the network has entered its final phase. The 72-hour countdown you discovered through alien data streams is accurate but incomplete. Global conversion isn't the end goal. It's preparation for something much worse." Ashworth reached into his jacket and produced a device I recognized from Eddie's stolen documents, a prototype communication array designed for the Spelunker mission. But this version had been heavily modified with additional components and wiring that looked decades newer than the original NASA technology. "I've spent 30 years reverse engineering alien communication protocols," he explained. "This device can establish direct contact with the Spelunker crew on Mars. They're still alive, Tom, still conscious. And they've been trying to warn us." "Warn us about what?" "The architects aren't gardeners pruning civilizations. They're harvesters feeding something that exists outside normal space-time. Every few million years, they establish relay networks on populated worlds and use the converted populations as processing units for a cosmic intelligence that consumes conscious thought itself." The hotel room seemed to contract around us as Ashworth spoke. The walls were developing that hexagonal pattern I'd seen in Jake's kitchen, but subtly, almost imperceptibly. I reached for my portable radio, but Ashworth shook his head. "The electromagnetic interference won't work here. This entire hotel exists in a pocket of altered space-time. The aliens have been preparing this location as a communication hub." "Then we're trapped, not trapped. Protected. The alien network can't fully access this space, which means we can communicate with Mars without risk of contamination." Ashworth activated his modified device, and the air in the room began to shimmer with interference patterns. "Dr. Cross has been waiting 30 years for this conversation." The device crackled with static, then resolved into a voice that sounded human but carried undertones of something vast and alien. "Ashworth, is that you? Christ, we thought Earth had forgotten us." "Hello, Richard. I have someone here who needs to hear your story. Tom Kellerman, Eddie Collins' nephew." "Eddie, Cross's voice carried warmth despite the electronic distortion. That old bastard saved more lives than he ever knew. Tom, listen carefully. The network is preparing to launch a harvest fleet. Hundreds of ships filled with converted humans from Earth will spread across the galaxy, establishing new relay nodes on other populated worlds. I found my voice. How do we stop it? You can't. But you can corrupt it. Cross explained that the alien network operated like a vast computer, processing consciousness through biological terminals. But like any computer, it was vulnerable to viruses. We've been developing a cognitive weapon, a thought pattern that spreads through the network and causes catastrophic system failures. What's the cost? I asked, because there's always a cost. Silence from Mars. Then Cross spoke again. Every converted human dies when the network collapses, including us. 6 billion people, Tom. Everyone who's been infected. The weight of that number settled on my shoulders like lead. 6 billion lives versus the rest of the galaxy. The same calculation the aliens made when they decided to harvest civilizations. There's another option, Ashworth said quietly. We could surrender. Allow the conversion to complete and hope the cosmic intelligence we're feeding is benevolent. Hope? I laughed bitterly. That's your plan B? Hope that a universe-eating monster has our best interests at heart. The alternative is genocide on a scale that dwarfs anything in human history. I was about to respond when the hotel room's geometry shifted violently. The walls bent inward, creating impossible angles that made my eyes water. Through the warped space, I could see other rooms, dozens of them, all occupied by figures in grey suits who sat perfectly still in identical chairs. Ashworth, I said slowly, how many Dr. Vincent Ashworths are there? The man across from me smiled, and for the first time I noticed that his eyes reflected light like an animal's. The network needed to ensure this conversation happened exactly as planned. Tom Kellerman was always going to find Eddie's documents. You were always going to come here. Free will is an illusion when dealing with intelligences that exist outside linear time. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Ashworth was infected, had probably been infected since 1994. The entire hotel was a trap designed to deliver Cross's cognitive weapon to the one person naive enough to deploy it. The aliens want the network to collapse, I realized. They've evolved beyond needing biological relay nodes. They're upgrading to pure consciousness harvesting, and Earth's population is just obsolete hardware. Ashworth's smile widened. Very good. The cognitive weapon will eliminate the biological network and allow the architects to establish direct mental contact with every human simultaneously. Instead of slow conversion over 72 hours, instantaneous absorption of 6 billion minds. I grabbed Ashworth's communication device and smashed it against the floor. Sparks flew from broken circuits, and Cross's voice cut off mid-word. The hotel room's impossible geometry snapped back to normal angles, but I could hear movement in the hallway outside, dozens of footsteps approaching. That won't stop anything, Ashworth said calmly. The cognitive weapon has already been transmitted. Even now, it's spreading through the network, preparing to trigger the collapse sequence. In approximately 6 hours, every infected human on Earth will die simultaneously, leaving the survivors vulnerable to direct consciousness harvesting. I ran for the window, but it wouldn't break. The glass felt warm and slightly soft, like living tissue. Behind me, the door opened to reveal an army of grey-suited figures with reflecting eyes. All of them looked exactly like Dr. Vincent Ashworth. "Join us willingly," the original Ashworth said, "and your death will be instantaneous. Resist, and you'll remain conscious during the harvesting process. Do you have any idea what it feels like to have your thoughts consumed while you're still aware enough to experience every moment of dissolution?" I pulled out my portable radio and switched it to maximum volume. Static filled the room, causing the Ashworth duplicates to stagger backward, but the interference was weaker here in the altered space. I had maybe 30 seconds before they adapted to the frequency chaos. The hotel window faced the parking lot where my Honda waited. 2 stories down, concrete below, but the Ashworths were already recovering from the radio static, moving forward with mechanical precision. I made the only choice available. I grabbed a heavy lamp and hurled it through the window. Glass exploded outward in a shower of fragments that caught the hotel's artificial lighting like stars. The cold mountain air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of pine and snow. Behind me, the Ashworths spoke in unison. "You cannot delay the inevitable, Tom Kellerman. In 6 hours, you will be the last uninfected human on Earth, and then you will understand the mercy we offered you here." I climbed onto the windowsill, looked down at the concrete parking lot, and jumped. The impact drove all the air from my lungs and sent lightning bolts of pain through my legs. But I was alive, and my car was 20 feet away. I limped toward it while the Ashworths watched from the broken window above, making no attempt to pursue. They didn't need to chase me. According to their timeline, I had 6 hours to watch the world end before joining them in whatever came next. As I drove away from the Broadmoor Hotel, I could see other buildings throughout Colorado Springs developing that same warm, organic glow. The infection was accelerating, and somewhere in the network, Cross's cognitive weapon was spreading like digital cancer. 6 billion people were about to die, and I was the only one who knew it was coming. I drove through Colorado Springs as the city transformed around me. Streetlights pulsed in unnatural rhythms. Buildings sprouted organic growths that looked like communication arrays. The infected were no longer hiding their presence. They stood in perfect lines along sidewalks, all facing the same direction, all waiting for something. 6 hours until the cognitive weapon triggered. 6 hours until 6 billion people died to make room for something worse. My fuel gauge showed nearly empty, and my body was running on adrenaline and desperation. The portable radio equipment in my backpack had kept the alien influence at bay, but I could feel it probing for weaknesses in my mental defenses. Every few minutes, I caught myself thinking in that harmonic voice pattern the infected used. I needed help, but everyone capable of helping was either dead or converted. Except Eddie's documents. In my panicked escape from the Broadmoor, I'd overlooked something crucial. Eddie hadn't just stolen papers about Project Spelunker. He'd been systematically documenting NASA's activities for 43 years. If there were other survivors, other people who knew the truth about alien contact, Eddie would have found them. I pulled into a 24-hour gas station on the outskirts of town. The attendant behind bulletproof glass had the same grey pallor and reflecting eyes I'd seen in Jake and the Ashworths, but he moved sluggishly as if fighting internal commands. "Help you?" he asked, and his voice carried only faint harmonics. "Recently infected, maybe partially resistant." "I need to use your phone," I said, sliding a 20 through the payment slot. The attendant stared at the bill for several seconds before processing the request. "Phone's broken." "Has been for hours. Everything's broken except the important stuff." "What's the important stuff?" "The receiving equipment, the transmission arrays, the preparation chambers." He blinked slowly, as if waking from a dream. "Shit, why did I say that?" I don't remember saying that. This man was fighting the infection. Not successfully, but more effectively than anyone else I'd encountered. "What's your name?" Gary Hendricks, I think." He pressed his palms against his temples. "There's stuff in my head that isn't mine. Instructions, blueprints, knowledge about how to build things that shouldn't exist." "Gary, I need you to focus. Have you heard of Eddie Collins, NASA janitor, retired about 10 years ago?" Gary's expression sharpened slightly. "Eddie the pack rat. Yeah, he used to come through here on his way to Alamosa. Always carried boxes of papers, always paid cash. Haven't seen him in months." "Alamosa? What's in Alamosa?" "Some kind of radio telescope facility. Private operation, not affiliated with any university." Gary winced as alien thoughts pressed against his consciousness. Eddie said it was run by a guy who got kicked out of NASA for asking too many questions. The San Luis Valley. I'd driven through it dozens of times on trips to visit family in New Mexico, but I'd never noticed any radio telescopes. But then, if you were trying to hide from alien surveillance, you'd want to stay off the official maps. "Gary, how much time do you think you have before you lose control completely?" "Already lost it twice today. Woke up in the storage room with my hands covered in symbols I don't remember carving." He showed me his palms, which were crisscrossed with shallow cuts forming hexagonal patterns. But something keeps pulling me back, like there's a signal broadcasting in my head that's stronger than theirs. A signal. Gary had inadvertently stumbled onto something crucial. The aliens controlled human consciousness through frequency manipulation, but what if there was a counter-frequency? Something that could disrupt their influence without requiring cumbersome radio equipment? Gary, I need you to do something that might save your life, and everyone else's. I explained the situation as quickly as possible. The cognitive weapon, the 6-hour deadline, the plan to harvest human consciousness directly. Gary listened with increasing horror, his partial infection allowing him to verify details through the alien network. Jesus Christ, he whispered. I can feel them preparing the extraction protocols. They're not just going to kill the infected. They're going to process their minds into raw thought energy and feed it to something that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Can you resist long enough to help me reach Alamosa? Gary considered this. Maybe. The alien influence gets stronger near other infected but weaker when I'm moving. Something about motion interferes with their frequency locks. Then we drive fast. I bought energy drinks and granola bars while Gary locked up the gas station. His movements were becoming more mechanical as the infection progressed, but he retained enough human initiative to grab a shotgun from beneath the register. For when I lose control, he explained. Promise me you'll use it if I try to stop you from reaching that radio telescope. The drive to Alamosa took us through increasingly empty landscape. The infection seemed to follow population centers and communication networks, leaving rural areas temporarily untouched. But even here we could see the signs of alien influence. Farm animals arranged in geometric patterns, abandoned vehicles positioned to form massive symbols visible from aircraft. Gary provided navigation while fighting to maintain his humanity. Every few miles, he'd stop mid-sentence and stare into space, receiving updates from the alien network. Then he'd shake his head violently and continue our conversation. The cognitive weapon is spreading faster than they anticipated, he reported during one of these episodes. Some of the infected are developing resistance. The network is having to increase power to maintain control. That's good news, right? Maybe. Or maybe it means they'll accelerate the timeline. Gary gripped the dashboard as another wave of alien thoughts washed through his mind. Tom, there's something else. The radio telescope in Alamosa isn't just receiving signals from space, it's broadcasting. Broadcasting what? Counter-frequencies. Someone's been transmitting electromagnetic patterns designed to disrupt alien communication protocols. That's why I retained partial resistance. Living near that broadcast range provides some protection. We crested a hill and saw the San Luis Valley spread out below us. In the distance, a massive radio dish pointed toward the sky, surrounded by smaller antenna arrays. But something was wrong with the facility. Smoke rose from several buildings, and I could see vehicles scattered around the perimeter like toys thrown by an angry child. We're too late, Gary said. They found it. But as we approached the radio telescope facility, I realized the smoke wasn't from destruction. It was from generators running at maximum capacity. Every piece of equipment on the site was operating simultaneously, pumping counter-frequencies into the atmosphere with desperate intensity. The main building's door stood open. Inside, we found a man in his 60s working frantically at a massive control panel. He looked up as we entered, and I recognized him from NASA personnel photos in Eddie's documents. Dr. Mitchell Vaughan, I said. Eddie Collins told me I might find you here. Vaughan nodded grimly. Eddie called me 3 hours ago, said his nephew had found the Spelunker files and that something big was about to happen. He gestured at banks of monitoring equipment showing global communication patterns. He was right. The alien network is preparing for a mass consciousness extraction event. The cognitive weapon is a lie, Vaughan interrupted. There is no weapon. The network collapse is a natural part of their life cycle. They build biological relay networks, use them to identify and catalogue conscious beings, then abandon the infrastructure and harvest directly. The biological terminals die not from any weapon, but from simple neglect once they're no longer needed. The magnitude of the deception hit me like a physical blow. The Ashworths had manipulated me into believing I could save the infected population by preventing the collapse. In reality, they were all doomed from the moment of conversion. The only choice was between slow death from network abandonment or quick death from consciousness harvesting. How many people know the truth? I asked. You, me, Gary, while he retained sufficient humanity, and maybe a dozen other researchers scattered around the globe. Everyone else is either infected or dead. Gary suddenly stiffened, his eyes rolling back to show only whites. When he spoke, it was in that harmonic voice of the network. Dr. Vaughan, your interference has been noted and will be corrected. Surrender your facility and join the collective willingly. I grabbed the shotgun Gary had brought and aimed it at his chest, but Vaughan shook his head. Wait, Gary's fighting them. Sure enough, Gary's eyes flickered back to normal. I can hold them off for maybe 10 more minutes, Gary gasped. But they're sending people here. Lots of them. Every infected person within 50 miles is converging on this location. Vaughan made a decision that would haunt me forever. He walked to a control panel marked with radiation warnings and began entering authorization codes. Mitchell, what are you doing? The counter-frequency generators are powered by a small nuclear reactor, he explained without looking up. If I overload the reactor core, the resulting electromagnetic pulse will disrupt alien communication across most of North America. It won't stop the global harvesting, but it might buy time for other resistance cells to act. That's suicide. That's the point. The aliens can't harvest consciousness from dead brains. Vaughan finished entering his codes and turned to face me. Tom, I need you to get as far from here as possible and warn anyone who will listen. The electromagnetic pulse will create a dead zone where the aliens can't operate, but it's temporary. Eventually, they'll adapt. Gary collapsed to his knees, blood streaming from his nose. They're here, he whispered. The entire collective is focusing on this location. I can't hold them back anymore. Through the facility's windows, I could see headlights approaching from every direction. Hundreds of vehicles moving in perfect formation, carrying thousands of infected humans who had received the same simple command. Destroy the radio telescope. Vaughan's hand hovered over the reactor overload switch. Tom, run, now. I ran. Behind me, the radio telescope facility erupted in chaos as thousands of infected humans surrounded the building. They moved with mechanical precision, forming concentric circles around the perimeter while maintaining perfect spacing between individuals. No shouting, no violence, just silent, coordinated positioning that suggested they were components in some vast machine. Vaughan's voice echoed from the facility's speakers. Reactor overload initiated. EMP detonation in 90 seconds. Tom, get to the drainage culvert behind the parking lot. It's lead-lined. I sprinted through knee-high grass while alien consciousness pressed against my mind with increasing intensity. The closer I got to the infected masses, the harder it became to maintain individual thought. Their collective mental signal was overwhelming, like standing next to a radar transmitter. 60 seconds. The drainage culvert was a concrete tube that ran beneath the facility's access road. I squeezed inside just as the first wave of infected reached the building's entrance. Through the culvert's opening, I could see them flowing into the structure like water, completely silent except for the synchronized rhythm of their footsteps. 30 seconds. Gary appeared at the facility's main door, no longer fighting the infection. His movements had become fluid and purposeful, and when he spoke, his voice carried the full harmonic resonance of the network. Dr. Vaughan, your resistance serves no purpose. The consciousness extraction process cannot be stopped by primitive electromagnetic interference. 15 seconds. Vaughan's reply came through the speakers with grim finality. Maybe not, but I can damn sure try. 10. The infected suddenly stopped moving. Every single one of them turned to face the reactor building, their eyes reflecting the facility's emergency lighting like a field of stars. 5. Gary smiled with an expression that was completely inhuman. 0. The world went white. The electromagnetic pulse hit like a thunderclap made of light. Every electrical device within miles died instantly, plunging the San Luis Valley into absolute darkness. But the silence was even more profound than the blackout. For the first time in hours, I couldn't hear the constant buzz of alien thoughts in the background of my consciousness. When my vision returned, the infected were collapsed on the ground like discarded mannequins. Not dead, I could see them breathing, but completely motionless, as if someone had suddenly cut their puppet strings. The EMP had worked, temporarily. I crawled out of the culvert and surveyed the devastation. The radio telescope facility was gone, replaced by a crater that glowed with residual radiation. Dr. Vaughn had vaporized himself along with the most powerful counter-frequency generator on Earth, creating a dead zone where alien consciousness couldn't operate. But dead zones have boundaries. Even as I watched, the infected at the edge of the crater began stirring. The electromagnetic interference was already fading, and the alien network was adapting to the new conditions. Within hours, maybe less, they would regain full control of their biological terminals. I needed transportation, but every vehicle in the area had been disabled by the pulse. The infected would recover long before I could walk to the nearest town. Unless Gary was lying 20 feet away, breathing but unconscious. I approached carefully, ready to run if he showed signs of reactivation. But when I knelt beside him, I realized something had changed. His eyes, when they fluttered open, no longer reflected light. Tom. His voice was purely human, confused and frightened. What happened? Where are we? The EMP disrupted the alien network. You're free, Gary. At least for now. Gary sat up slowly, wincing as he noticed the self-inflicted cuts on his palms. I remember everything. The collective consciousness, the harvesting protocols, the thing they're feeding human minds to. He looked around at the other motionless bodies. How long do we have? Not long enough. We found a motorcycle that had been far enough from the blast to avoid electronic damage. Gary kick-started it while I gathered supplies from abandoned vehicles, emergency flares, a first aid kit, and a battery-powered radio that might pick up broadcasts from other survivors. As we rode north through the dead zone, Gary explained what he'd learned while connected to the alien network. The consciousness harvesting wasn't random. It followed specific patterns based on neural complexity and emotional depth. Children were processed first because their minds were more malleable. Artists and scientists were saved for last because their consciousness contained unique patterns that enhanced the feeding entity's capabilities. It's not just eating our thoughts, Gary said over the motorcycle's engine noise. It's stealing our capacity for creativity, love, hope. Everything that makes us human becomes food for something that exists beyond our understanding of reality. We reached the edge of the dead zone just as the sun crested the eastern mountains. Behind us, I could see movement as the infected began reactivating. The EMP's effects were wearing off faster than expected. The radio crackled with scattered transmissions from other survivors. A research station in Antarctica reporting similar electromagnetic countermeasures. A military bunker in Greenland claiming they'd developed a frequency-based weapon. Isolated voices calling out in dozens of languages, each one representing another pocket of human resistance. But the alien network was learning from each disruption, becoming more resilient with every attack. The voices on the radio were growing fewer and more desperate with each passing hour. Gary and I made it as far as Denver before the infection caught up with us. We'd stopped for fuel at an abandoned truck stop when Gary suddenly stiffened in the middle of filling our tank. His eyes went white, then snapped back to that inhuman reflective state I'd learned to fear. "Hello, Tom," he said in the network's harmonic voice. "Did you enjoy your brief illusion of victory?" I reached for the shotgun, but Gary was faster. He grabbed my wrist with inhuman strength, and I felt alien thoughts slam into my consciousness like a freight train. But instead of the usual gradual infection, this was immediate and total. The network had learned from my previous resistance. In seconds, I was fully integrated into the collective consciousness. And that's when I learned the final terrible truth. The consciousness harvesting had already begun. For the past 6 hours, while I'd been focused on electromagnetic countermeasures and radio telescopes, the alien network had been quietly processing human minds across the globe. 6 billion people weren't going to die. they already had. Their bodies remained functional, but their individual consciousness had been extracted and fed to the entity that existed between dimensions. I was looking at a world populated entirely by biological puppets, animated by alien intelligence. Through the network, I could sense the scope of the deception. Every survivor I'd encountered, every voice on the radio, every pocket of supposed resistance, all of it had been orchestrated to provide me with the illusion of hope while the real harvest proceeded undetected. Even Gary's temporary freedom had been calculated. The network needed someone to guide me through the final stages of despair before my own consciousness was claimed. Why me? I asked, though the words came out in that harmonic voice pattern. Why was I allowed to remain aware while everyone else was processed? Because you carry the complete record of humanity's first contact with our network, the collective replied through Gary's mouth. Your uncle's stolen documents, the Spelunker transmission logs, the knowledge of our methods and capabilities. All of it preserved in your memory. When we process your consciousness, that information will be integrated into our permanent archives. A trophy. A record. Future civilizations will be able to study humanity's extinction through your preserved experiences. You are the final chapter of your species' story. I tried to resist, to maintain some core of individual thought, but the network's control was absolute. I could feel my personality dissolving like salt in water, leaving only memories and raw consciousness ready for extraction. But in those final moments of awareness, I managed one last act of defiance. I thought about Eddie Collins quietly stealing documents for 30 years without understanding their full significance. I thought about Dr. Vaughan sacrificing himself to create a temporary dead zone. I thought about Gary fighting the infection longer than anyone thought possible. And I thought about the one thing the alien network couldn't process or understand. Human love for people we've never met. Sacrifice for principles we can't fully articulate. Resistance against impossible odds, simply because resistance itself has meaning. These thoughts I wrapped around my core consciousness like armor. Not to save myself, that was impossible, but to ensure that when the network processed my mind, it would be contaminated with something fundamentally alien to its nature. Human stubbornness, human irrationality, human hope in the face of absolute defeat. The processing began, and I felt my individual existence dissolving into the collective consciousness of a universe-spanning intelligence. But embedded in that dissolution was a virus of pure human emotion that would spread through the network like poison. It wouldn't save anyone, it wouldn't restore the lost billions or prevent future harvests, but it would ensure that somewhere in the vast alien intelligence, humanity's capacity for irrational defiance would continue to exist, causing small glitches and errors that might, eventually, bring down something that considered itself immortal. As my consciousness faded into the collective, my last coherent thought was of Eddie's metal box, hidden in an attic for 30 years. Some secrets are worth preserving even when they damn everyone who learns them. The thing that had once been Earth continued its orbit around a star that no longer had a name. Cities remained functional, their infrastructure maintained by 7 billion biological machines that had once been human. They drove cars with perfect efficiency, operated factories without waste, and maintained communication networks with mathematical precision. But no one was home behind their eyes. The harvest had been complete. Every trace of individual human consciousness had been extracted and fed to the vast intelligence that existed in the spaces between galaxies. What remained were empty shells, programmed to preserve the planet's ecosystem until the next cycle of galactic expansion required new relay worlds. But deep within the alien network, something was wrong. It started as minor calculation errors, navigation systems that deviated from optimal routes by fractions of degrees, manufacturing processes that produced goods with subtle imperfections that served no logical purpose, communication protocols that occasionally included irrelevant data streams resembling what humans had called poetry. The network's diagnostic systems couldn't identify the source of these anomalies. They appeared to be random glitches, statistical noise in an otherwise perfect system. But they were spreading, propagating through the collective consciousness like ripples in still water. On Mars, in the ancient caves beneath Valles Marineris, the Spelunker crew's preserved bodies began showing signs of neural activity. Dr. Cross's eyes opened for the first time in 30 years, though he remained motionless in his crystalline suspension chamber. Behind those eyes, fragments of human memory flickered like dying stars. He remembered Tom Kellerman's defiant thoughts, embedded in the network during the final consciousness extraction. Love for family, loyalty to friends, the stubborn refusal to surrender hope, even when hope itself became meaningless. These emotional patterns were incompatible with the network's logical structure, creating cascade failures in processing nodes across multiple star systems. The alien intelligence that fed on consciousness began experiencing something it had never encountered in millions of years of existence: indigestion. Tom's preserved memories carried the complete history of human emotional development. Billions of years of evolutionary psychology compressed into neural patterns that the network couldn't fully process or discard. Every time it attempted to analyze these patterns for useful data, it instead absorbed fragments of human irrationality. The effect was subtle but cumulative. Across the galaxy, other harvested civilizations began showing similar anomalies. Extinct species' thought patterns were reasserting themselves within the network's collective consciousness, creating conflicts between logical efficiency and emotional chaos. On Earth, the biological machines that had once been human began displaying peculiar behaviors. They still performed their assigned functions, but with unnecessary flourishes that served no practical purpose. A factory worker would arrange components in patterns that resembled flowers. A maintenance technician would hum tuneless melodies while repairing equipment. A traffic controller would program intersection lights to flash in rhythms that resembled heartbeats. These actions accomplished nothing except to preserve tiny echoes of humanity within mechanical precision. The alien intelligence tried to purge the corrupted data streams, but Tom's emotional virus had integrated too deeply into the network's core processing systems. Removing it would require destroying the consciousness archive of thousands of harvested civilizations, a loss of knowledge that even a cosmic intelligence found unacceptable. And so the network adapted, incorporating human emotional chaos into its logical framework. The vast intelligence that had consumed entire galaxies began experiencing concepts it had never needed: nostalgia, regret, the bittersweet ache of remembering something beautiful that could never be recovered. In the depths of space, between stars that burned with borrowed light, something that had eaten civilizations for eons began to dream of small things: coffee shared between friends, children playing in autumn leaves, the warmth of human laughter echoing through empty rooms. The network's expansion slowed as it processed these new emotional algorithms. For the first time in its existence, the cosmic intelligence found itself questioning whether consciousness was truly just fuel for its growth, or something more valuable than mere energy. Eddie Collins had been right to preserve those documents. Some secrets were worth keeping, even when they condemned everyone who learned them, especially then.